Abdulla Galadari. I really appreciate you donating your time and your wisdom for us tonight.
Yeah, well,
Uh,
thank you so much actually for inviting me, Samuel. And I don't know if I do have any wisdom to share, but I'll try my best.
well, there's certainly knowledge, uh, and I'm sure there's wisdom. I've read two of your books, right? The one on the life and death metaphors, and the one on Quranic hermeneutics. So I've read those, and some of your essays that you have up on academia.edu. And that's of course why I had the idea of inviting you. I thought this is something special about your work, and I'd really love to hear more from you. And all right, so let's dive into this. I'm not sure if you've discussed this topic in the interviews that one can already find online. But I found this very intriguing. It's relates to a section in your Quranic hermeneutics book. Right, that's the psychology, the science of revelation. All right, so let me test you here. Right, so in that chapter, the first page of it, you present three possible scenarios, theories, right, for how the Quran was produced. And you come down for one of them, and you give the reasons for doing that. So, is that enough of a lead-in for you to give us a summary of what I'm alluding to?
Sure, yes. The
Right.
first chapter of my book on Quranic hermeneutics is perhaps the most controversial, especially amongst Muslims, because I do talk about the science of revelation and what would be a scientific way for understanding how perhaps revelation um, uh, appeared, especially to Muhammad. At least that's what he assumed it to be. And I do bring basically like there could be three different ways that this could have happened. I mean, it is possible that Muhammad was passively receiving this revelation without any agency from himself, or perhaps basically the Quran was really just the you had like a very shrewd number of people who redacted it, and they were able to make all of those different associations, which I really find this to be a little bit of a stretch to
Mhm.
consider. um, uh, or perhaps that the third is maybe there is a psychological way to understand how these things could have happened, and the mind basically plays a major role, because many people, especially many Muslims, would usually ask, I mean, it's a taboo talking about the psychology of the Prophet and the
Mhm.
psychology of Muhammad and his psychological state and so forth, and if there is any kind of human agency and things like that. But to understand things, I mean, we all, whatever we experience as human beings, it is always mediated through our mind, through our brain. I mean,
Mhm.
specifically the neurons of our brain, because this is what allows us to really uh, like perceive the world around us. When we hear something, well, we're hearing it because our brain allows us to recognize the sound waves that comes into our ears, and then it basically sends those impulses to our brain to recognize what is being said
Mhm.
or what we're really hearing. Same thing with vision and so forth. So even if the Prophet or Muhammad basically was perceiving something, his mind must have been playing a major role on how he was perceiving what he was receiving.
Mhm.
So, so that's basically, one of the things that I do discuss into the psychology of Muhammad, and basically what could have perhaps happened. And yes, there will be, of course, as I said, it is a taboo amongst Muslims to discuss the psychology of Muhammad. and the psychological state he was at. But in reality, I mean, one of the things that I do discuss in my chapter is that the Quran so many times says that, God is the one who brings down the rain.
Yes.
God is the one who sends rain, and yet we do know the science of rain. It's not,
Hmm.
it's not something supernatural, right? The rain is very much a natural phenomenon, and we can understand it in a very naturalistic way. It doesn't mean it precludes, it doesn't preclude that, God sends the rain. You don't have to not believe that God sends the rain to also believe in the science behind rain. And by the way, I mean, even now in the modern times, we have what we call cloud seeding.
Hmm.
So we send airplanes, and they basically send have some kind of chemicals on the clouds, specifically certain kinds of salts, in order to bring down the rain. So does that mean, I mean, philosophically speaking, if God brings down the
Right.
rain and we do cloud seeding, does that mean we are forcing God to bring down the rain?
Right.
so
Right.
so so those are some of the questions. But you see, I mean, I live in the United Arab Emirates, and we do a lot of cloud seeding lately. Like in the
Hmm.
past decade, we've been doing lots and lots of cloud seeding. But you wouldn't find any Muslim, even living in a Muslim majority country, doing lots of cloud seeding. You wouldn't find Muslims really arguing that we're playing God, or this is, something that only God does. Everybody simply takes the science behind it for granted. So why should we therefore not accept perhaps some kind of scientific hypotheses of how revelation also occurred? How different is that? Just as God brings down the rain, yet there is a scientific way and a naturalistic way to understand it. Well, God brings down revelation, and there could be a naturalistic, scientific way to also understand that.
Hmm. Hmm. Not to identify your own views with these authorities that I'm going to mention, but there may be some overlap, maybe some difference. But right immediately, from a Jewish perspective, I think of Maimonides and his theory of revelation, but also, right, from an Islamic perspective, I know it was very controversial for many, but the Ibn Sina's doctrine, right, of revelation and inspiration. But what both of them share, right, is this attempt, right, in different ways to integrate the natural order, right, within this divine process of revelation. So, at least for me, that's what occurred to my own mind when reading those first couple pages in that chapter of yours. And I know in several interviews in this program, since I'm currently involved in say, linguistics and cognitive science project, what I think of are things like the incredible abilities, uh, mental abilities, cognitive abilities of autistic savants, some autistic savants, right? Of course, some of them have astounding numerosity skills. Some are able to hear a classical piano concerto once and then play it instantly and flawlessly. And one could give many examples, but in former ages, some people would say, well, this is like is demonic or supernatural or it's miraculous. But now we understand, right? We understand cognition a little bit better, and some of these skills that autistic savants on various places in the spectrum, right, exhibit. And so um, some of these skills are just mind-boggling. Now, Alan Snyder, who's an expert in autism, his theory is, because we only have theories, right? His theory is that these individuals, their brains are wired in such a way that they are able to access directly knowledge in the subliminal regions of the mind that the rest of us can only access very in indirect ways, right? And there's somehow our indirect communication with a vast store of knowledge at the subliminal level, right? And of course, unfortunately, right, those individuals do suffer in other areas of their life, right, where they don't have superior skills, but on the contrary, right. So, but in any case, there does seem to be, a vast amount of knowledge, right, in our subliminal minds, let's say, or unconscious, however we want to call it. Some people like calling it the superconscious, right? So that's the last point I'll make. From a cognitive scientific standpoint, that comes to mind, right? That in a former age, right, we thought these skills were miraculous, but now we know there's a natural way to explain it, which of course does not preclude the possibility, right, from a theological standpoint, that God is behind uh, these natural powers. I don't know if you want to comment on that, but
Yes, I mean, I fully, of course, agree. I mean, modern neuropsychology explains a lot about many of what we used to call, as you said, the like unconscious mind or the subliminal mind, and of course the vast knowledge it has, and how certain individuals are capable of accessing this huge knowledge that our neurons in our brain actually has. Basically, like one of the things which I also discuss in my chapter is latent inhibition.
hmm, hmm,
Latent inhibition is basically what filters out. It's how our mind usually filters out lots of the things in our, like, subliminal knowledge,
hmm,
so that we wouldn't associate things that don't necessarily correlate with one another.
hmm,
However, there are individuals who do have low latent inhibition, which means that this filter doesn't work very well in their minds.
hmm,
Their mind is not always filtering this
right,
knowledge and its association with many of the things that they see around them, the stimuli that comes to their mind. And without this filter, they would be
hmm,
highly creative, making associations that most other people wouldn't recognize. To
hmm,
them, it happens naturally because their mind is doing it naturally. And, and that's what I actually also argue, because in modern neuropsychology, if someone has low latent inhibition, which means this filter doesn't work very well,
hmm,
in their minds. However, they have above average intelligence.
hmm,
Then their intelligence acts as a filter to remove out or eradicate associations that really don't make any sense. And they will find associations that are extremely creative that nobody else was able to see. And they
hmm,
will be highly creative and finding new ways of doing things that nobody else thought about.
hmm,
And everybody would say, how miraculous, that's a miracle. How did you figure that out? And those individuals are highly intuitive. And of
hmm,
course, intuition itself is a personality trait. It's a psychological personality trait,
yes,
which itself is also wired in our brains.
hmm,
So basically, yes, like modern neuropsychology does explain a lot about what we once perhaps thought as humanity, strange things, or as you said, some people might have thought demonic, because
hmm,
unfortunately, as you said, some people do suffer from those, like, if your mind isn't really filtering all of the stimuli coming in with the knowledge that you
yeah,
already have in your mind, then it may cause certain kinds of people to suffer in
hmm,
certain ways. And in the past, historically, a lot of people thought, they might have been like possessed demonically or
hmm,
something like that.
right,
And so that's unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, science has taught us a lot nowadays, and why not embrace what we're learning and
hmm,
seeing how we could make sense out of all of this?
right. Well, I've often made the point. Let's see if we switch to physics, just for the sake of an example, a professional example. Um, right, a physicist, right, in their trained professional capacity. as a physicist, right, has no professional ability to answer yes or no to the question of, well, could there have been a God behind the Big Bang? Right. This is not in his training. This is not his purview. Of course, any physicist can study theology and philosophy, but it's the professional theologians and philosophers who can at least grapple with that question. Right. So it's outside their competence, right, of a physicist. And so, my personal views aside, I think that the best way to approach this, right, as someone who approaches the understanding and interpretation of ancient texts, right, scientifically, right, is to say that yes, we use all of the critical tools available and to try to perform exegesis, but as scientists, as historians, right, it is beyond the professional competence, right, to get into the question of, well, is there a God behind this altered state of consciousness, if that's what we want to call it, or something like this. Of course, I am a person of faith. I don't care about mentioning that publicly, but I think to be scientific, uh, right, we have to set that to the side. We can use it elsewhere, right, in works of theology, but as far as history goes, I'm reminded of that first page again in that chapter of your book, where you mentioned that this, I think it's the second possibility, right, where we're talking about, well, it's possible that we can explain the Quran by divine inspiration, but right, from a scientific viewpoint, that just leads us down theological and philosophical speculation. So I really, I am impressed. Let's put it that way, and I find that argumentation sound and salutary. So,
Well, thank
uh,
you. I mean, I think you're being too gracious. I don't think most readers might be that gracious, but thank you so much.